Hello, my name's Danielle Fry, and I'm just sharing a bit of my story, something that I experienced the last couple years that I think might be helpful for others. I'm calling it God's Timing and Provision. It's my scoliosis journey turn testimony. So one of the churches that I was sharing with, I had spoken at a few churches that had helped me along the way, and they had asked me to put in PowerPoint form. So I'm going to share that with you as we go. It's kind of helpful. It keeps you focused, so it's not so boring. And also it's nice because then I can share some pictures of my process and my story. So let's share that now. Okay, there we go. So like I said, it's God's timing and provision. Thank you all so much. Anyone who provided prayer, financial support, any type of support that you gave me, I really do appreciate it through this whole process. And I just wanted to remind you that God, he appreciates it. It doesn't go unnoticed. Hebrews 6:10 reminds us of that. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love that you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. So thank you so much. Now my journey, like I said, I'm going to share a little bit about what happened with my scoliosis process and surgery. Along with it, some of the lessons that I learned along the way, some of the things that came to me as I was going through some of these obstacles, some of the things that I was reminded of from the Bible. I can put the instructional manual for life, basically. At times that, I think I did a good job at grounding myself in the Lord. Other times, not so much, but he still came through. And those are the really powerful pieces that I'm going to share. And then some of the pieces that I'm going to talk about relating my process to different stories in the Bible, different examples. Some of that came to me after the fact when I was reflecting back on what I experienced. So I just thought it was all worth sharing. So that's what we're gonna do today. So this is an X-ray of my spine prior to surgery. As you can see, I have 3 curves there. My process, my journey with scoliosis started at age 11. I was diagnosed with it. I woke up one morning with my head kind of stuck to my shoulder, my ear stuck to my shoulder, couldn't lift my head for several days. Went to get checked out, and that's when they found it. At that time as a child, though, I don't remember that having a lot of pain on a regular basis for the most part. And this is the case with most kids, I feel like, unless they're really severe cases. There's not as much pain with it. You're just much more resilient in your body, and it's more flexible and fluid. And but as you progress, as you age, that can change, and that's what happened for me. It got to a point where I was having daily pain all the time somewhere in my body, and some sort of, at very least, discomfort, if not pain. I was using a lot of pain management devices. I think the last I had counted before I pursued surgery was up to 13 that I used on a regular basis. That included like an inversion table where you hang upside down to release the discs to give them some space. I had a handheld TENS unit that I had that thing strapped to me almost 24/7, especially for sitting. I went through so many of those because I wore them out all the time. It got to the point where it was at least the last year or two before surgery where most nights in order to go to sleep, I was sleeping on what I call my bed of nails. It's an acupressure mat. And the sharp points of the mat, what they do is they go into your skin and they numb the nerves. So at first it's uncomfortable, then the nerves in your back become numb and you can actually relax better. So I needed that in order to sleep. So that's where I was at with headaches very often as well. And I knew it was, the pain was getting worse. I was wanting to know what was going on, thinking maybe something had changed in my back. maybe an additional issue like a bulge disc, something along those lines. I didn't expect though that we would find it was February 2020, the new x-ray showed that it had increased my curve is 3 degrees in 3 years. So they were up to 48 and 43 degrees. My third one, I don't even have it mentioned here in the slide, I realize, but that's because that one we couldn't address in surgery, but the two lower ones we had. But finding that out was a shock because as a child, I was told that there's a misconception out there that, or there used to be anyway, that once you stop developing and growing, the curves would stop growing. And that's what the doctors had told us. So I was pretty shocked and disturbed by that finding. Concerned about my future, of course, because I was already in a lot of pain. If it continued to progress at that rate, would I be in 10 years, 20 years, and so on. So we also, research says that once it crosses the 40-degree mark, it's more likely to continue to progress too. So with hearing that news, I went researching. I had always known of spinal fusion surgery, which is depicted in the slide here on the left. So I was always aware of that, but I hadn't heard good things. I know that it does work well for some, but I've heard a lot of horror stories really about it. And for my case specifically, my issue covers my entire spine, I would have had these metal rods, as you can see, basically from the base of my neck to my tailbone. So especially with my lifestyle, I'm very active. It's really important to me that I remain active. It's really helped me with health issues over the years, that I keep moving. It's really actually what they suggest for your spine health, to keep moving. And so that's something that I've been avoiding. I've always wanted to avoid that option. So after much research, it took a lot because it was hard to find. I discovered ASC, anterior scoliosis correction surgery. In the picture, you see it as VBT, vertebral body tethering. That's what it's called when it's the version for children. The adult version is ASC, which is what I had. Now I found this option. I shared it with my chiropractor, who I had been with him for 12 years at that point. So he knows my spine, he knows my circumstances very well and my lifestyle. And he had always, discouraged the option of surgery because of what was available. He did his research on this and he came back and he said, "You know what, Danielle, I think this is a game changer for you. I really think this could be what you need." So I went pursuing it to find out that there's only 3 surgeons in the US that perform the surgery on adults. None of them are local in the state in Pennsylvania, which became an issue, one of the issues. I did find one in New York City that I kind of narrowed it down to him as being the best option for different reasons. And I went pursuing it. So this is just me showing you a Facebook share that I had posted. I traveled to New York City in June of 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic, which was pretty wild. Flew in and out the same day. I prayed a lot on it, and I just really felt that this was all being revealed to me at this point for a reason in my life and with other things going on, that it was the right timing for me to pursue something like this. And so I went for it, and that's me sitting at the park. And that's kind of how it started becoming my testimony, is through Facebook sharing, actually, because from start to finish, from the moment I got the news on the x-rays and the whole way through, I was just openly sharing. It was a really difficult time for everyone. The world was falling apart and losing its mind. And then you throw on finding this news out, and then I had some personal stuff going on too. There was just a lot of difficulty. So I was at times being very raw on Facebook, which I think is what people needed at the time, to know that it was okay to be struggling. But I was also sharing what was getting me through, which was God and my relationship with him. And people just really started responding, like I said. So it started taking off. And that's how I started to realize how powerful our experiences can really be, through sharing it with others. But so I went that day. They did what's called bending x-rays to check my flexibility, and to do an exam because to determine if I was eligible or not. So, I was holding my breath and praying a lot for that appointment because at my age, a lot of people aren't good candidates and they don't qualify any longer because the discs have deteriorated. And I do have a few that are in not great shape. Or they're just not flexible enough. Their spine's too rigid because of their age. So I did find out that, as it says here, that I was eligible. They scheduled the surgery for July 27th, so I was extremely happy. They said that would be a good candidate. And so here is me sharing. It was July 6th of 2020. I was just saying prayer warriors needed. So the next day, my surgeon was advocating with the doctors that were working with my insurance company at the time to try to get them to approve it. And if not, then I would have to appeal it and probably lose my current surgery date. So I was just sharing that with people asking for prayers. And also something I didn't mention is, I pursued specific insurance for the purpose of trying to pursue this surgery. I shopped in hopes that it would cover it even. So there was a lot on the line. So then July 7th rolls around and surgery gets canceled due to insurance. So of course I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed. All my efforts, I was really, really hopeful on that July 27th date. But in those moments though, you start to realize, what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on the problem or on the solution? And this is where some insights were given to me. Like I said, some at the time helped give me like a perceptual shift that I needed. And the way that happens is by turning to God by prayer, getting in the word, listening to sermons, just reading faith-based materials of some sort. That's how we get that perceptual shift. But I'm going to share some of that, and I'm going to share, and some of it came to me afterwards, like I said. What I noticed was there seems to be about 3 options for how, I'm sure there's more, but there's 3 that jumped out at me of options for how we respond to those disappointments, those storms in our life. And I noticed those 3 options in the disciples, 3 ways that they responded to the storms in their journey. And so I want to look at those. So the first one, and some of the first one's in Mark 4:35 through 41. Some of the passages that I share, the scriptures, I'm going to read fully, some for the sake of time, so you're not on here forever. I'm just going to reference them and sum them up. So in Mark 4:35 through 41 is a story where Jesus was in the boat with the disciples while a major storm hits. Meanwhile, he's sleeping in the boat while they're panicking, basically. In verse 38, I want to reference, it says, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" This is what the disciples were asking him. They were frustrated with him. And of course, Jesus woke, he calmed the storm, everything was all good. But the reason I reference this is, how often, even if we don't admit it or say it out loud, how often we feel it, how often we're praying and we're not seeing, we can't see, is he doing anything? Is he there? So I wonder how often you have felt that way. It gives me comfort to know, though, that even the disciples at times have struggled with those thoughts and those feelings. And they had him right there physically with them. They were witnessing and experiencing miracles all the time, and they still struggled because they're human. So that's comforting to me that I'm not doing so bad. But yeah, we have those moments. But the other thing that jumped out at me is that's one option, one way that we respond to him, but also in their response to him, if you notice, it says teacher. So no wonder they were questioning and doubting. They didn't really even know him yet. They didn't truly know who he was. They knew of him and they've spent a lot of time with him, but they didn't really know him, to be referencing him as teacher at that point. So that's important. How well do you know him? Are you spending the time with him to know him? We can't just be going to him in desperation and desperate moments and asking for help. And I'm not saying that he won't help us when that's all we're doing. He will still at times, I think, come through. But I think that that's not how we get to know him and how we have a true understanding. Because once we have that true understanding and really know him for who he is, that's when that faith comes in. That's when we don't panic in the middle of a storm. We can have that peace beyond all understanding. So there's the first example of what jumped out at me of an option for the way we respond to him. The second one's in Matthew 14:22 through 32, and I'll read that one. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So there's a lot that we could unpack there. Just a couple things, though, that jumped out at me that are common for people that they see, often in this story is, Peter's faith. I can see his growth from, the first story, even where he doubted if Jesus cared. He has grown to this place where he's willing to step out on water. And I think we can minimize the amount of faith that takes at times, in the middle of this storm, to step out on those waters and actually believe that you can defy laws of gravity and walk on water. It's a lot bigger of a step than I think people generally give him credit for, in my opinion. But I can relate to him in the fact that I have moments where I feel I'm like that, where I'm like all courageous. And and you'll hear through my story, there's those times when I'm like, yeah, we're going to do this. And we don't need to know how, because God will come through. And then, and then how easy it is, though, to then lose sight of him and sight of the solution and focus on the problem. The wind caught his attention, the storm caught his attention. And it's not even always negative things, I think. I think we have to be aware it's not always that the storm distracts us from him. It's other things too. So the blessings in our life sometimes, we can start overly focusing on them and lose sight of him even, so it's all kinds of things that can take our eyes off of him. But I can relate, because anytime I've done that, I inevitably start to sink, just like Peter. So, excuse me. The other part that I wanted to look at, if we kind of go back earlier in the story, is looking at verses 25 and 26. Sorry. And 25 and 26, it says that during the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. I wanted to point that out, because I wonder, why didn't they recognize him? And how often do we not recognize him, in life in general, but then particularly in our storms, So I had a couple points on this, a couple ideas, a couple theories on maybe why they didn't and how that might relate to us and our circumstances at times. So maybe his provision doesn't look like we expect it to, was my first thought on that. So the disciples probably didn't expect Jesus to be walking on water. At this point, they've seen him perform miracles. So they probably did expect him to take care of it in some way at this point, but maybe just calm the storm from where he was at, you know. Um, but he did so much more. And that's the point I'm getting at is often our expectations put him in this box. They minimize him. And so we don't even recognize when it's him. So the way I was doing that is, I'm praying for and asking people to pray for the insurance. Pray that the insurance covers it. Pray that my doctor convinces the doctor and the insurance company to get it covered. That's what I'm focusing on. That's what I'm asking for. So that's what I'm expecting from him is to cover it, to get it covered by insurance. He showed up and his provision was so much more than I expected, but it's easy to get confused by that and see that because it wasn't my way and it wasn't in my timing, and miss the blessing in it and miss his work and his hand and what he's actually accomplishing. That's so much more. And I'll share that with you of what that looked like and, the impact that it had on so many people, including me in a bigger way than it would have if it just got covered and I got that surgery in July. So thinking about those times when you look back, that's one of the reasons I want to share this is to help people look back on some of their past experiences, maybe with perceptual shift of what it really was and what was really happening and how he was really at work, but also currently what you're going through and your future storms, because you're human, you're going to have more of them, to be looking for him and to be aware that your expectations could blur your vision, and think that you're seeing a problem when it's really Jesus himself. He shows up, he shows off, he usually offers bigger and better, and when that happens, we need to be aware and praising him. And before it happens, we need to praising him for how he's going to work it out. That faith, that trust that we just know it might not be our way, but we trust. So we praise him ahead of time for what he's going to do. That's one of the things I've been learning through this process. So then my other point to why they might not have recognized him is also related to our perceptions or our expectations, and how that affects our perceptions. But so their expectation also, I wonder if they were fixated on the negative more. We can have that tendency, when things go wrong, we seem to expect them to get worse, right? And so they see something on the water coming towards them, and they're probably already, in a panic and maybe even complaining, wondering, why is he not doing something? Where is he? And so that negativity, it instead of expecting a miracle like water walking, they expected more negative, the other shoe to drop. So they perceived him as a ghost, something to fear, something more negative. Again, I can relate to the disciples on this, because God's shown me over and over again his power and his miracles and what he's capable of. Yet when he does show up and he does show off, I still act shocked, which is an indicator that I wasn't expecting it, even if I was praying for it, which it drives me crazy that I'm still at that place. But, and I just wonder how things could be different, for us, how things could change if we started expecting him to show up and show off and not be shocked when he does. I'm going to share some examples through my journey of times when he did just that. He showed up, he showed off, and I was like, which I shouldn't be as a believer, but so yeah, we should be expecting the blessings because he promises that, and he's always faithful. So then the other point with this second story in Matthew that I noticed is I mentioned earlier, that Peter had stepped out in faith, so he had grown some since the previous story that we talked about. But also, if you look at verse 27 and 28, it says, "But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come to you on the water.'" So they didn't recognize him. They thought he was a ghost. They were terrified. He said, "It's I." So Jesus tells them, it's I. Peter's response was not teacher, it was Lord. So again, another example of how he's grown in his faith and as a Christian. He knows him better. He knows him more fully by calling him Lord. So that's just something I think, that I try to look at is how am I growing? How am I progressing? Am I progressing? Am I stagnant? Because that's the fun part with the Christian walk is it's endless. Like the Bible is just so layered and complex, and Jesus, there's just so much to him. And so we shouldn't ever get stagnant in knowing him and understanding him through the word. And if we do, that's on us, So I just noticed, even looking at the disciples, how the different ways, there's two different ways that they responded, and how they're, starting to grow and become stronger through each experience. So like each storm has strengthened their faith. Each storm has allowed them the ability to know Jesus better. And it does that for us too, but we have to be looking at it through the right lens in order to see him. Okay, sorry. The third response that I noticed that came to me is in Acts 12, 1 through 16. And I'm going to summarize this for the most part. So in this story, James was just put to death by Herod, and Peter was arrested right after. So as you can imagine, high stress, intense situation, right? Verse 6, though, says Peter was sleeping between two soldiers. So if you can imagine, your brother in Christ was just put to death for being a believer, for not denying Christ. You're just arrested for the same reason. Pretty clear what the outcome's probably going to be. Probably just worrying and wondering what method they were going to use is what I would probably be running through my head. But Peter's sleeping. So, and this was pointed out in this piece I got from a sermon I was listening to again. This is how we get these insights, and this is how we have these perceptual shifts, is feeding ourselves in different ways. And so he was sleeping between two soldiers. And so what faith that takes to be at peace. So if you think, he went from freaking out in the boat that because Jesus was sleeping, and Jesus wasn't freaking out enough for him, apparently, him and the other disciples, to and not knowing who he was, calling him just a teacher, to then identifying him as Lord and having faith to step out on the water. Now, was he perfect? No. He lost sight and lost grip of that faith for a bit. But then here he is now at the point of facing death. And through his trials and experiences with Jesus, that's how he got to this place. Through just learning through each trial and each obstacle that he could trust him. And he knows him fully now. He knows completely what he's capable of. So he's able to be at peace. So I just found that very powerful to see the progression for the disciples and wanted to share to help us to be more aware of our progression, and that we're feeding ourselves the things that are going to keep us moving onward and upward, with the Lord. So after that, though, so Peter's sleeping between the two soldiers, and then we know that then God releases him. His chains fall off. He sends an angel to him that tells him to stand up, put his clothes on, and leave. He does. Just summarizing for time's sake, not to hold you guys too long. So he does that, and then he heads to Mary's house. And it says that there are many people praying there for him. So at Mary's house, there's all these believers praying specifically for Peter, right? They're praying for him, and it doesn't say exactly what they're praying for. But then in verse 14 through 16, it says that the servant girl recognized his voice at the door. So he's banging on the door. He must say that it's Peter, or he must say something that she hears his voice, because it says the servant girl recognized his voice but didn't open the door. So she goes running to the rest of them basically and tells them it's Peter. They don't believe her. They basically think she's crazy. And then she keeps persisting, and they finally say, well, if it's so, it must be his angel. And so again, expecting the worst, like bad happens and we expect worse to happen, right? James is gone, so they can't even fathom, even though they're praying. It says that they're praying for Peter. So, just like how I said, even though I'm praying for something, I'm shocked when it comes through. Same thing. They thought the only way it could be him was if it's angel, because he had to have been put to death in their mind. So I just think it's our awareness of our ability to do these things, these patterns as humans, and to just expect things less from God. I just think it's important to share and to think about that. So those are the three ways that I noticed anyway. I'm sure there's plenty more, but the disciples had responded to the storms, and how I think we can relate in our experiences as well. So this Facebook post that I have on here, it's just an example of a time that I had a perceptual shift to, and I shared it on Facebook. And I'm just going to read like the middle part that I've highlighted, because it says, but whatever you're looking at, it's not the end. It's a portal to your potential. And I thought about that, it being a portal to our or a portal for our potential. But a portal it's not helpful. A portal is not going to get us anywhere if we don't use it, right? You have to walk through it. A portal is a pathway to another destination. And so our troubles, our difficulties, our storms, they can be a portal to your potential. God can use it for so much bigger than you imagined. But we have to be aware. We have to first be able to see the portal, right? We have to be aware it exists in order to walk through it. So yeah, that's just something I thought. Another example of a way that my view of what I was experiencing was shifted. So then, okay, it gets canceled, right? We'll go back to the timeline. So, so it gets canceled. We start the insurance appeal process, which is lots of fun. I spent the next 6 months filing 3 appeals and then 1 external appeal. Had an attorney send a letter, all kinds of things. And then it got to a point where I was out of options when it came to insurance. And the out-of-pocket cost for the surgery starts out in the US at $150,000. That's not including any travel expenses or any additional needs that I could potentially have along the way. So at that point, maybe it isn't meant to be. I had people at times saying that to me. Um, you know, I had people who said, how do you know? How do you know that you should keep pushing? Maybe this is God telling you that it's not supposed to happen. And you know what? That's a tough one. I had to ponder on that a bit and pray on that a bit, because how do you know? But I came to some conclusions, and something that I looked at was, if you look at Luke 5:17 through 20, it says, one day as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem were sitting there, and the power of the Lord was present for him to heal the sick. Some men came carrying a paralytic on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the towels into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, friend, your sins are forgiven. And ultimately, I'll skip forward, but ultimately, when Jesus said that he was healed, and he stood up, took his mat, and walked. So when I look at that story, I think, okay, so imagine if they quit as soon as they saw the first sign of an obstacle, right? If his friends were like, sorry, it's too crowded, right? I think can be this misconception that if it's God's will, then it should be easy. That if there's obstacles, that means it's not what he wants for us. And really, I find it's quite the opposite, to be honest. Because, and I've grown to start to recognize that that's how he develops us. We wouldn't grow into strong soldiers for him, like it says in there, in the slide, if we weren't challenged, right? If we didn't have these obstacles. So it's typically there's more of them as a believer from what I see and what I've been taught and what I've experienced. But he always gets you through, because as you're leaning on him, that grows that faith, right? So, and then I thought, okay, well, can I push too hard for something? Because I've been told, that I can be tenacious, is one term, stubborn maybe at times in life. And, so, I really had to ask myself that. And what I came up with is I guess we just keep praying. We pray about it, and we pray, let thy will be done. Meaning, okay, if it's not your will, I'll accept that. But guide me, let me know. And so we pray that, and then we have to trust, and we have to listen. Listening part can be hard sometimes. And then the other thing, that really gave me comfort is when I'm questioning, should I keep taking this on or not, is Romans 8:28, because and we know that he works all things together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So just falling back and trusting that he'll work it out for my good, regardless, and just keep listening for his voice. So those are what gave me comfort to say, okay, I'm pretty confident that this is still in his plan. And we'll keep moving forward and keep praying that if it's not, he'll help me to see that. And that if he shuts that door, I can accept it. So that's basically where I came to with it. But one of the things that jumped out at me too, when looking at this in Luke, is that the importance of the friends we turn to. So verse 20, it says, when Jesus saw their faith. So it wasn't just the paralytic's faith, it was their faith, his friends. So his friends' faith carried him. Literally, they carried him, but their faith carried him to get him healed. And I'm not saying, that we shouldn't have non-believing friends. I don't believe that at all. I think it's good for us, actually. The only way we can be believers, and the only way we can keep strong faith, and if the only way that we can make good choices, is by hiding away from the rest of the world, then are we really accomplishing much, for one? Also, I think it's important that we have an impact on those around us that aren't necessarily like-minded or believing. However, I think it's very important to be aware of who we're turning to, especially in the storms. When we're in those moments of life, when we're scared, we're uncertain, because they're coming from a different perspective if they aren't a believer. So I do think that's important, who rallies around us and who we turn to in those moments, that they come from that faith perspective, because that is what will get us through when our faith is waning. So then he provided the plan at that point. So God at that point then brought it to my attention that there was international options. So I reached out to Dr. Hedge in India, and I spoke to a family as well from Australia who he had treated. So there was this family in Australia on the support group page that I was on Facebook. I read their story. They had positive things to say about their experience there with Dr. Hedge. I reached out to my doctor in New York, and he confirmed Dr. Hedge's qualifications. He knows him personally. He's done consultations with him. He said, if this is the route you need to take, then I would support it. So that was helpful. That gave me more encouragement as well. The surgery in India cost $35,000. And that is like pre-testing and everything. So it's unbelievable. That's a whole nother topic. So I shared this plan with my family and friends on and off Facebook. It just makes me laugh sometimes when I think of some of the facial expressions I got and reactions. But, initially like, okay. But most of them responded much like the paralytics friends. Most of you responded much like the paralytics friends did, and were like, let's do this. Every time I talk about this part, it's when I get choked up, because I just didn't imagine the outpouring. Again, I was shocked by God's provision, because people were like, even if we got to tear the roof off, kind of like they did, we're gonna do this. And people jumped in and took over when I was tired and weary, So I praise God for theirs, faith and support, and willingness to tear some roofs off for me. Sorry, some said that it was impossible, so there's those naysayers, of course, or that I was crazy to trust a foreign doctor was a big one. And, I just kind of knew, knew that these folks did not know the power of God, and they haven't experienced it, but we were going to show them. So, so I moved forward at that point. Surgery gets scheduled in India. It's just me sharing it on Facebook. The date was March 31st. Flights were booked. I'm excited. This is really happening. And then I put now just to raise about 25 grand by then. And I posted this January 22nd. And the date was scheduled for March 31st. So this was, one of those moments where I could say, yeah, I stepped out like Peter onto the water, I can't say that I stayed there all the time. I can tell you, it was very stressful. And I say 25 grand because we had already raised some for the potential New York trip that didn't happen. So, but anyway, so this is just me talking about communicating with the hospital, in India and things. But yeah, so we set the date, now his provision. And this is where, I talked about he provides bigger and better. What he had planned to the way that he planned to use this whole process, and it was way more impactful on like so many people. I had people along the way, because I was sharing on Facebook, not privately, but typically I was much more, my profile was much more private, and I was being public with all these posts. So I have I gained all kinds of friends I didn't have before, which has been, a huge blessing. Um, I've had some people who then reach out to me asking how do you get saved? What's that process like? I want to reignite my faith because of all the sharing. That it wouldn't have got to those people otherwise. And just me, the impact that had on me too. And just it, it's just so much bigger. And this is a picture of a couple pictures from the spaghetti dinner that we had middle of COVID. You see people with masks on. Um, Again, some people said you're not going to get many people to show up because it's COVID, and I don't even know how many we had. We had a lot. We had a very good turnout, tons of baskets, as you can see. People, complete strangers that I'd never met, showed up and donated their entire day to work the event. People coming up to me at the dinner, just saying they heard about my story. It was in a newspaper. On the slide there, it's showing an advertisement on Armstrong Cable. So many people really stepped up and got advertised for me too. Just so much more than I ever expected. So we move forward, and it's the week of the surgery. So it was a week full of stress and striving. There was, a lot more details than usual with traveling, COVID testing and visa issues because of it being COVID time period. It was taking longer to get our visas. The COVID testing, as you know, has to be a small window of time that you can get the test and get the results back. If you get tested too far in advance, then it's not relevant. So just a lot of trying to figure that out, sort that out. I was having some personal relational stressors that week on top of it. And I remember Wednesday saying to a friend of mine, I said, I don't like where my head's at, I don't like going into this way with my head where it's at. Just I'm not feeling secure. I'm not feeling strong in my faith. I'm feeling rattled. I'm all over the place. Yet I kept trying. There's that stubborn part, forcing it with everything I had that week. What happened was the Indian consulate in New York City had processed my visa as if I was a minor. So it got denied due to lack of parental signatures. So what happened, we're waiting. It's already down to the wire that week, but we were told we should get it in time. We believe it. It comes in the mail. I'm all excited. I open it and I literally went to my knees because I was just like, and it was them sending our passports back and with a denial letter. And so I spent most of that day emailing and calling and trying to correct the error because it was clearly an error, and trying to get that taken care of. But ultimately what happened was God said, not right now. So it was the day before our flight was supposed to leave, and it got canceled. So this is a pic of a video. I was making videos back then here and there and putting them on YouTube and sharing of just my process and the things that were coming to me and the realizations I was having. And so this is me just updating everybody that surgery had been canceled. And you see I have a huge smile on my face, which is interesting. That's a God thing. I explained what was going on. Well, here's what happened. So when I say it was a God thing that I was able to smile like that, what I mean was he just has this way of placing people. He placed people on my path through this process. The person that called me to break the news to me that it didn't matter what I did. There was nothing at that point. It was impossible. I was even willing to, I said, can I drive to New York and just physically deliver this and get this taken care of, which prior to COVID, I could have. But they didn't allow anybody in the building any longer. It had to all be done by mail. And since they mailed back our passports, there was no way to get anything done in time. And Jithu had to help me process that. Jithu is the international coordinator that was assigned to me through the hospital. And when I say, God puts certain people on your path, Jithu, we communicated a lot, trying to coordinate everything. And we communicated through the WhatsApp all the time. And I noticed on his profile picture, it was like some sort of saint. So I was like, is he Christian? Turns out he is, very much so. He has very strong faith. I didn't even realize. I was surprised by that because I just was not aware of how many Christians there were in India. So it was Jithu that broke the news to me over the phone about the surgery, and my heart sank, of course. But he told me exactly what I needed to hear in the moment. And this is where that, who you surround yourself with or who you turn to in those moments really matter, because instead of panicking or just feeling sorry for me, he came from a faith-based perspective and told me what I needed to hear, which is what, gave me the peace to be smiling in that earlier picture. He didn't coddle me. What he said to me was, you know what, as Christ followers, I remember word for word, he said, as Christ followers, we have a cross to bear. We have our own cross to bear, and this one happens to be yours for some reason. And he said, you've been carrying it very well so far. And people are watching you, and you're going to get back up and you're going to carry it again, and you're going to show them, that he'll help you do that. And he said, you know what, this is just a bump in the road, and a month from now you'll be in India and we'll be laughing about this. And but before he went to that part, before he went to that piece of just trying to like smooth it over, and he told me what I needed to hear, which is that sometimes as followers, it's actually promised that it won't be easy, our walk, and so that helped me to be able to keep moving on, and to be able to do it smiling. So that reminded me of Proverbs 27:17, which is iron sharpens iron, and just that importance again of, an iron sword can sharpen another iron sword, but an iron sword can't sharpen itself alone. So we need each other as believers. So we need to be, that's where, a lot of people will say, well, I'm spiritual, or I have faith or relationship with God. That's all that matters. I don't need to go to church. I don't need to be in Bible studies. I don't need to do that. But it tells us in many different ways. And this is one that we need each other as believers, and we sharpen each other's faith, because it's not easy. This world doesn't make it easy to hang on to it and to stay sharp in our faith. And when I'm struggling, that's exactly what I need, And so, and this might sound kind of silly, but if, to use the analogy, but if you imagine trying to sharpen an iron sword with sandpaper, it's the only thing I could come up with, it would break down the edge versus sharpening it, because it's not made of the same material. Sandpaper is abrasive. Some people can be abrasive, at times, and break down if we're not careful, not aware, our faith, especially when we're earlier in our walk. We're much more vulnerable to those words from others, and their abrasiveness kind of getting us to doubt or worry more than have that faith. So same thing with, like, if we try to use clay is too weak to handle the pressure, and it would break and crumble. So just a reminder, of like I said, don't think we have to isolate from the rest of the world by any means, but when we're in those moments, just being aware of what we're hearing and who we're turning to. So anyway, the surgery gets rescheduled for April 19th and 21st, because he did a 2-phase surgery, this Dr. Hedge. So at that point, we had time to get refocused and prepared. We had a good plan for our COVID testing. When I say we, it was my brother and my mom that went with me. So I was confident. I was like, I got this all figured out because the testing site we had went to, the drive-through we had went to for the previous trip that got canceled, we couldn't go there again. She had to have a script. You're really only supposed to have a script if you're sick. So we went to Rite Aid. And I had a backup plan just in case, because Rite Aid said it only takes 2 days. Usually you should be fine. But, that made me nervous. So when I talked to the airport, they said, yeah, we have a testing site here. It takes approximately 30 minutes to get results. I was like, great. So we went early just in case. So that would be covered. We get there early. And at that point, my results had come back, but my brother's and my mom's had not yet. But then the storm starts to hit again. And it hits hard at that point because if you just think of all the ups and downs so far at this point, like I was feeling really chill actually that day too. What happened was the way that storm hit is we get to the check-in desk at the airport, and the lady says, well, I can't give you boarding passes because you don't have your COVID test results. And I said, oh, well, we're going to use the testing site at the airport. And she said, it's on the other side of security. And I was like, okay. So, well, you can't go through security without your boarding pass. You can't get your boarding pass without your test results. And I was like, wait a minute, this makes no sense. I thought she was confused or messing with us, honestly, at first. And I said, that is not logical. And she said, yeah, well, just blame it on the airport. It's not the airline's fault. It's the airport. They moved it there. I'm like, blaming them is not going to do me any good. She really just wasn't showing any desire to help us. I think she was over it at that point. She probably had how many people before us earlier that day with the same problem and issue. And so, she said, well, you should probably call Rite Aid. You're just going to have to call them. So I step aside and I'm in the airport on the phone. Rite Aid's like, no, we didn't get them back, but we don't really control that. Puts me on hold, said, let me see if there's anything I can do. I'm pacing back and forth. And at this point, I'm going to be honest, like I was very focused on the storm. I wasn't as Peter stepping out onto the water saying, God's got me. I was panicking. And you got to figure too, I'm traveling somewhere that's not probably highly traveled, especially at that time period. So just saying, oh, I missed my flight, I'm going to hop on the next plane. It doesn't work that way. It was very difficult to even find the right connecting flights to make this happen when we were aiming to in the first place, So I'm just panicking and picturing that I'm going to lose my surgery date again. And I'm pacing and I am turning to God at least, because I remember being on hold, God, please, God, please, God, please, God. Nothing else I don't think was coming out but that. But I can remember looking over and the airline attendant she would make eye contact with me every once in a while and be staring at me a little bit while she's at her desk. And my brother, he went to TSA trying to get them to see if they would escort us there so we could get our tests. Didn't have any luck. He came back. He was trying to plead with her and different things from my understanding while I'm over here distracted. And then I suddenly turn around and things just seem to change. I was like, what's happening? Her demeanor was different. She was on the phone and piecing together, it sounded like she's talking to a supervisor of some sorts and trying to make things happen. And I'm like just a little dumbfounded, I have no idea what's going on. And this is why your prayers and your support system, again, matter so much. So I trying to figure this out, and she hands me this from when she says, honey, this was given to me when I was going through a really difficult time. And as a believer, it really helped me get through, and I'm going to be praying for you. And so what she did was she had got permission from her supervisor to at least give us boarding passes to, we were going to Newark, New Jersey. And then from there, we'd have to get tested. And we had plenty of a layover to do that and everything. And then we could, once we had those results, get on the flight to India. And as soon as she handed me this and I made the connection that it was a faith-based reason, especially, I just lost it. I mean, bawling in the airport. Again, in shock, right? Like, really? When I should expect these things, but I was stuck on the storm. My focus was there. And then we leave and I find out that as I'm distracted, over here pacing, what happened at one point was that changed everything was she looked at my mom and my brother and said, well, what are you going to do now? And my brother said, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to pray. And the two of them sorry I missed out on it, but the two of them stood right there in the airport in front of her and prayed. And it, God spoke to her through that and softened her heart. Like I said, we shouldn't have to be believers for someone to do that, of course, but I'm pretty sure she had probably been through it all day. Like right next to us, some lady was screaming, yelling, and had to be escorted out for the same exact reason. You could hear the argument. She was obviously rightfully upset, but again, she takes that route because she doesn't have the faith, I assume. And so when I'm panicking, being surrounded by the people of faith to carry you, like the paralytic's friends, their faith carried him through, when he couldn't, and it was that case for me. So that happens, and we make it on the plane, praise the Lord. Just sharing a pic of my cute scoliosis shirt that I got through that support group that I'm in. And then a pic of me on a plane, all geared up for COVID. We make it to India. Just some pics of my mom, my brother, and I. Show up to the airport in India, and the hospital actually sends not half their staff, but a lot of staff members to greet me and welcome me, and they bring flowers. It's pretty amazing. We're on our way to the hospital at that point, and I see this little car. It says Jesus on the back. I'm on the right path. It's a good sign. And then I just shared that pic of this is something you see in a lot of third world countries. Haiti was like that a lot. A lot of times you see even like livestock on with them as well, with the whole family. Just an indicator that we're in a whole different world, Send some pics of me in the hospital after surgery. There's my surgical team, my mom, my brother. Pic of me walking. I had you walking the very next morning after both surgeries. Wasn't easy, but and then the next storm hits. So I'm in the hospital, and my mom shares this post on, this is April 25th, asking for prayer warriors because I was having some serious pain. It started that morning. I noticed it about 10 a.m. I remember calling the doctors in to tell them, and that's India time, 10 a.m. Horrible abdominal pain. And then you imagine that it's anterior surgery, so my incisions are on both sides. My ribs were separated. There's a lot of pain from the surgery anyway, and then you throw that on top of it. They started doing different types of testing throughout the day. The pain just kept increasing all day long. It was getting so bad. And I was having to go to the restroom constantly. Some of this might be overshare, but I'm not really shy. So sorry if you don't like it, but there's a point to me sharing this. So it was putting like a lot of pressure on my bladder. So I had to go to the restroom constantly. And walking to get there was so difficult anyway. And I can just remember being in there, the restroom often, just crying in pain. And at some point, the only thing that was coming to me was saying the Lord's Prayer, because mean, this went on into the evening. Saying the Lord's Prayer and then muttering, I was just saying, I praise you, I praise you. Like, I don't know how, when I say muttering, I was barely getting the words out and how much feeling was behind it, but it still matters to him that we say it despite how we're feeling. And that's what I had been taught to do. So that's what I was doing to get through. Now, sorry, let me go back. So, yes, sorry, I was right. Okay. So this screenshot, and the reason I'm sharing it is I had mentioned that Jithu and I were communicating through WhatsApp. Now, once I got there, we had a whole group chat with the whole surgical team, which was really cool to have access to them. And Jithu was part of that, and my brother. And so I could communicate when there's issues and things. And that's how I had got them to come see me that morning. Now I share this because this is a conversation between us. Now it says 8:58 a.m. That is US time. Once I came home, it switched over to our time versus India time, which is 10 and a half hours. They're 10 and a half hours ahead. So that's important. I'll tell you why in a minute. But at that point, it just finally hit me. And I was like, this is what it is. I had a bowel blockage, basically, from medications and things, which is not only extremely painful, but I mean, if left for too long, it can be life-threatening. But also it was such a big threat to my process in getting home because this was only a couple days before I was supposed to be released. Oh no, this was the day before I was supposed to be released from the hospital. And then there was a short window the following Thursday that I was supposed to be flying back home. There wasn't a large window of time between being released from the hospital and flying again. And so all this was running through my head, and I just wanted to get out of the hospital too, and go to our hotel. So I share this because months later, I was at home after the surgery and starting to share my story and piece it together in my testimony. And I had said on Facebook, if anyone has anything to share with me, any way that it impacted them, could you reach out and let me know? And I got a Facebook message from a man named Gordon Cumberland, who is my grandmother's cousin. I've never met him. He asked if we could do a phone call, and we did, and it was very pleasant, delightful phone call. Got to know each other a little bit. But he said, the reason I wanted to reach out was, and I don't know if this matters or not, it's just so funny. He said, let me back up. Let me back up a minute. My grandma describes him when I told her about him reaching out to me before I got to actually have the conversation. She said, oh yeah, Gordon, he has so much faith. He really believes strongly in the power of prayer. He always has. That's the biggest thing I can say about him. And I was like, this should be interesting. So when I talked to him, what he said was, I saw your mom's post. I wasn't friends with you on Facebook, but I was with her, and I saw her post. And that was Sunday morning. And I went to church, and I'm a greeter there, and I was standing there greeting, and it would have been somewhere around 9 o'clock, he said, in the morning. And which is funny, that he pointed that out and he didn't even know that it mattered, or why it mattered. And I said to the other greeter, there's just something I got to do. You can handle this. And he said, I went into this room by myself and got on my knees, and I really prayed for you. And I just knew you really needed it. And he said, I prayed so hard. And when I stood up, I just got this feeling. I just knew that you were going to be okay, And I was like, wow, thank you for sharing that. And after I got off the phone, I went back searching because I was just curious. I was like, he pointed that specifically out that it was around 9 a.m. And wouldn't you know, it was it was 8:58 a.m. when I sent that, when the wisdom came to me that was what was going on, and I advocated for myself. And they followed through, and I got pretty much immediate relief the next day. Um, I felt so good that by the time the nurses got there, I had already showered myself, and which I hadn't. They were helping me with that prior, and they were a little shocked, and you know, they're like, "You're not supposed to be doing this." I'm like, "I feel great." I walked up and down the hallway, to earn my badge of release from the doctors. So yeah, it was very powerful to, hit the power of prayer and again, who you're surrounded by and who you reach out to. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, even if it's an overshare. Sorry. So this is after the fact. This is the results. On the left is my x-rays prior, and then right after, obviously, you can see there's 15 screws covering 10 different vertebrae, though, because 5 of my vertebrae, the doctor doubled up the tether cord. So there's double screws and double cord, just because it's a more rigid area, and just to have more reassurance if a cord would break, that I have a backup. So yeah, my curvatures went from 48 and 43 degrees down to 33 and 21. And what I had said prior and after too was, basically my goal was, if I could just turn back the clock a bit, rewind time, even like 5 to 10 years ago, because that was, at the time, I didn't know how manageable it was, but it was so much more manageable, and that's basically what this did. It rewinded time for me, and it's gonna maintain it. It'll hold those curvatures steady there, so they won't progress anymore. So thank you. Praise the Lord. So, and then here's an after picture. You can see before and after. This black and white picture, you can see how lumpy it is here. That's where one of my main curves is. And you can see my shoulder blade protrudes on the one side. And how nice and smooth it is now. So it's just a visual and external visual of the changes made. There's another fun pic on the other side. That's Jithu that I mentioned, my new Christian Indian friend. And they had provided like traditional Indian garb for my brother, my mom, and I, that we got to keep, which is really cool. They provided those for this moment. They had asked me if I would be willing to participate in an interview with several different media sources, just because they're trying to really get the word out and of what's available in India. So I guess scoliosis is very common there, and a problem that most people don't have access to the proper care. And so there's newspaper articles and various, like I said, media sources that covered it. They asked me some questions, asked the doctor some questions, just to share. Now, through that, there was a woman that reached out to me on Facebook Messenger, an adult who was needing corrective surgery. She previously had surgery, fusion actually, and she had some complications and was wanting to have revision surgery done. She had been researching, I guess, in the US and different countries, and finding it, of course, to be very expensive. And so the way that she heard about Dr. Hedke was through this outreach that they had done, and I got to be a part of it. So that was pretty cool. So that's another way that, and who knows who else in India was impacted by that being advertised and shared. So after a bit of time went by too, and this is another way that, his plan was bigger than my plan. is this little guy. He was able to get pulmonary valve replacement surgery because of everybody's support for me. I had some extra funding afterwards, and once I felt confident that I wasn't going to need it for any revisions or anything like that, then I reached out to Jithu and asked him what ways the hospital could use it. If there was some way I could give back to the hospital in India. And he thought about it, and he said, he came back to me later and said, instead of just directly giving it to the hospital, I have a better idea. He said, we have this program because there are a lot of children that are born with a hole in their heart. And it's very common, especially with low-income families, and probably due to malnutrition or something along those lines, but that they have a program to support the families that can't afford the surgeries for their kiddos. And again, another God moment. And I said to him, are you serious? Why? I said, I was born with a hole in my heart. So it was pretty impactful that he worked it out that way of, another way that, another avenue for, his work to be done. And it just happened to be that I was born with a hole in my heart as well. So I could relate. And, I don't remember it, of course, but I was always told the stories of that I was in and out of children's hospital frequently. And at one point they were getting discouraged because it didn't seem like it was going to be healing. So they were talking about surgery. And then the next time that they took me back, they were surprised to see that it had healed shut on its own. So I never had to have surgery, which was a blessing. But I can remember, I think there was a lot of kids in that boat, or in my generation, in my opinion, related to Vietnam and exposure to Agent Orange. But anyway, so I knew of other kids as I got older, and I can remember my mom saying about the one little girl. She said, yeah, she was born with a hole in her heart as well, just like you. But hers didn't grow shut, so that's why she's not allowed to run around and play with the rest of you kids, and I can remember feeling a lot of empathy for her in that, so it was just very, very cool that God worked in this way. So we were able to fully cover his surgery. He had surgery when he was an infant, but like they had told me, they said when they don't have somebody sponsoring them, they get lower quality care and equipment, sadly. And so he needed it replaced. And so we were able to do that for him. And this I'm just sharing because I thought it was funny. So just because I can relate to this as well, and that face of that little girl. When you pray, thy will be done, but then God asks you to do his will. Yeah, sometimes it's not the easy route, often it's not. And it's like, yeah, I prayed that, but are you sure? So anyway, just want to share that in closing because I thought it was funny. So yeah, I hope this is helpful. And I just pray that it lands on your heart and in a way that would be pleasing to God. And that if there's anything that I shared that is not pleasing to him, that he would discard that. But I just hope that you find it helpful and it gives you a perceptual shift on the experiences in your life, the way that it has for me, this whole process, and him opening my eyes to things along the way that without it, I wouldn't have seen. I grew immensely through it. And I hope it can help you. God bless.